Sometimes, a single dollar can buy you a world of trouble. But sometimes, it can also buy you a destiny you never knew you were searching for. Sarah Lockxley's eyes were tired, her spirit worn thin by years of caring for others. As a burnt-out veterinary technician in Denver, Sarah had seen too many animals suffer because their owners couldn't afford treatment. She'd witnessed the helplessness in their eyes, the same helplessness she felt every time she had to turn away a creature she couldn't save. The worst of these memories was Gus, a golden retriever she had fought for, only to lose him because his owner couldn't pay for the surgery he needed. "We just can't afford it," they had said, their eyes avoiding hers. That haunting moment was still fresh in her mind, a constant reminder of the burnout that had hollowed out her once vibrant passion for healing. It was on a lonely evening, her small Denver apartment, dimly lit by the glow of her laptop, that Sarah found something that would change the course of her life forever. She was scrolling through real estate listings, the kind of listings she would never be able to afford, trying to escape her reality for just a moment. Then, her eyes stopped on an ad. The headline caught her off guard. Willow Creek Ranch, 150 acres, Gallatin County, Montana. Price, $1. A dollar? Was it a typo? A joke? Maybe a glitch in the system? But as she clicked on the listing and read the fine print, the cruel reality settled in. It was a county tax lien auction. The dollar was just the opening bid. The real price was $60,000 in back taxes and debts. It was a debt designed to scare everyone off, except for the most foolish or desperate. Sarah had nothing left. Her savings were gone, her heart was broken, and her spirit was crushed. But what did she have to lose? In that moment, something inside her snapped. With a reckless click, she placed the winning bid, draining every last penny of her savings. A confirmation email appeared on her screen, and, just like that, Sarah Lockxley became the proud owner of Willow Creek Ranch. She was buying a fresh start, a place where the ghosts of the city could no longer haunt her. The thought of a new beginning, of something different, filled her with an unfamiliar sense of hope. The drive to Montana was long and filled with exhaustion. Her beat-up pickup truck rumbled along the highway, the road a blur beneath her tired eyes. When she finally arrived at the ranch, the sight before her shattered the dream she had built in her mind. The house was nothing but a sagging skeleton, the roof rotting away under the weight of time. The windows were empty eyes staring out into the world, and the front porch swing swayed mournfully in the wind. The ranch didn't feel like a new start. It felt like a forgotten graveyard, a place where hopes went to die, but Sarah was determined to see it through. She forced herself to walk past the crumbling house, the weight of her decision settling in her chest, and headed toward the barn. The barn was no better. Its doors hung crookedly on rusted hinges, and the whole structure leaned like it was tired of standing up straight. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, the smell of old manure hanging in the air like a ghost of the past. And then, from the shadows, she heard it, a low snort. The sound of a horse. But when Sarah moved closer, she realized the shape in the stall wasn't just any horse. It was a creature that had suffered. A magnificent, copper-colored stallion, but his body was skeletal, his coat matted with filth, his mane a tangle of knots. This was no ordinary horse. His eyes were full of something fierce, terror, pride, and something else, a deep, unspoken pain. Her heart dropped. This was Red. The last living being on her $1 mistake. She took a step back, but something inside her refused to turn away. The instinct to save, to heal, surged within her. This wasn't just about a ranch anymore. It was about him. She had to help him. Sarah approached the stall slowly, speaking to him in a low, soothing voice, but the horse only watched her with wary eyes, his body trembling with the trauma he had suffered. The next few days passed in a fragile silence between them. Sarah would bring him fresh water, hay, and slowly the wall between them began to crumble. Red, though weak and fearful, seemed to sense that she wasn't like the others who had abandoned him. They both had wounds, scars that had yet to heal. Each day, Sarah grew closer to him, the bond between them forming like an unspoken promise. But as she worked to heal his body, she realized the ranch was far from the fresh start she had dreamed of. Every day brought new challenges, and soon, someone from the outside world came to make it clear her presence was unwanted. The man was Orson Garraway, the owner of the neighboring Galway Cattle Company. His crisp clothes and cold smile made Sarah feel small and out of place. He offered her $5,000 to take the ranch off her hands, an insult disguised as charity. When Sarah refused, Garraway's smile vanished, replaced by something darker. 2 days later, Sarah found the fence she'd repaired was cut, the cattle she had bought on credit scattered. Then her truck tires were slashed. The intimidation was escalating. She had no choice but to stay and fight. For herself, for Red, and for the ranch that was becoming more than just a property. It was a symbol of her will to survive. But this was only the beginning. The days blurred together as Sarah settled into the harsh reality of her decision. Each morning, she woke to the sound of wind sweeping through the empty fields, the feeling of isolation creeping in like a heavy fog. But there was something about Red, something deep in his eyes that pulled her through each difficult day. They were both broken, but neither was ready to give up. Every time Sarah approached the barn, Red's eyes followed her with a quiet wariness, but also something more, an unspoken trust that began to build between them. He was still too weak to be truly dangerous, but his pride burned brightly. The first time he allowed her to touch him, a small but crucial victory, Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the horse healing. It was her, too. But the ranch was falling apart faster than she could put it together. The walls of the barn groaned under the weight of time, and the house was little more than a crumbling shell. Her savings were dwindling with every new problem that cropped up. The cattle she had managed to buy were sick, and the cost of fixing the barn was eating into her meager funds. Still, she pressed on. Red, for all his pain, had taught her one thing. The fight wasn't over yet. But the shadow of Orson Garraway hung over her like a storm cloud. His offer to buy the ranch had been a thinly veiled threat, and his subsequent actions made it clear he wasn't finished with her. The small acts of sabotage, cutting the fences, slashing her truck tires, were meant to break her, to drive her off the land he so desperately wanted to own. But Sarah wasn't like the others who had walked away from Willow Creek. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous in ways Garraway hadn't anticipated. Then, one night, as Sarah worked late in the barn, tending to Red, she smelled something, a sharp, acrid scent cutting through the cool evening air. Gasoline. Panic surged through her veins as she stepped outside, the darkness of the night pressing in around her. Through the cracks in the barn walls, she saw the flickering of orange light. Fire! Her heart pounded in her chest as she rushed toward the barn's entrance. Red was in there. She had to get him out. She ran through the thick smoke, her hands trembling, the heat of the flames licking at her skin. Red was frantic, his hooves pounding against the barn door, his desperate whinnies tearing at Sarah's soul. She couldn't see anything clearly, but she knew she had to save him. With a strength she didn't know she had, she threw open the door to his stall, only to find the fire already beginning to consume the old wood of the barn. Smoke choked her lungs, her vision blurred, but she refused to leave. The horse was in danger. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Red, as if sensing her determination, stopped kicking and backed away from the fire, his body trembling with fear. Sarah grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall, her hands slick with sweat as she aimed the nozzle at the base of the flames. The foam hissed as it hit the fire, but the flames kept creeping, hungry, relentless. Her heart stopped when she heard the sound of footsteps. 2 figures appeared at the entrance, carrying a gasoline can, their faces hidden in the shadows. They were the ones who had started the fire. Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't have time to think. She dropped the fire extinguisher and charged toward them, her voice raw with fury. "No, you won't destroy this! Not this time!" The men were startled, their eyes widening in surprise as they dropped the can and turned to flee into the night. The fire was still roaring, but the blaze began to shrink under the relentless spray of the extinguisher. By the time the volunteer fire truck and Sheriff Brody's cruiser arrived, the flames were under control, but the damage had been done. The barn was a charred skeleton, and Sarah's body was covered in ash and soot. She was breathing hard, but there was no time to rest. As the firefighters doused the last of the flames, Sarah saw the taillights of a truck speeding away down a back road. It was Garraway's truck. Her pulse quickened. The fire had been no accident. It had been a message, a declaration of war. Sarah's stomach twisted with fear, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She was furious, and this time she wouldn't back down. The ranch might be ruined, but she wasn't giving up. Not after everything she had fought for. Not after what she had seen in Red's eyes. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent in the barn, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to let Garraway take this from her. She had to act. The annual Gallatin County Livestock Auction was coming up. It was the event of the year, where ranchers from all over the area gathered to showcase their stock, and where reputations were made or broken. Orson Garraway was set to receive the Rancher of the Year award, and Sarah knew this was her chance to make her move. She didn't have much time, but she had something more powerful than money. She had the truth, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. That night, she spent hours grooming Red, brushing his coat until it gleamed like polished copper. His strength had been returning, his coat shedding the layers of neglect, revealing the beautiful horse he had once been. As Sarah worked, she knew one thing for certain. Red was ready, and so was she. The day of the Gallatin County Livestock Auction arrived, and with it, a new sense of determination that Sarah had never felt before. She woke before dawn, the cool Montana morning wrapping its chill around her as she prepared for the biggest challenge of her life. The air was sharp and crisp, filled with the promise of something that had been too long in coming. Today wasn't about the ranch, the debts, or even Garraway. Today was about justice. Sarah stood in the barn, her hands trembling as she finished grooming Red. The once proud stallion stood tall, his copper coat now gleaming in the early light. His muscles rippled beneath his coat as he shifted his weight, an energy in him that Sarah hadn't seen before. It was a quiet strength, the kind that only came from survival. He had been broken, but now he was whole again. The memory of the fire still clung to her like a second skin. She hadn't slept much the night before, but adrenaline had taken over. With every brushstroke, every whispered word of encouragement, Sarah had begun to feel the old connection they'd shared. It wasn't just about her healing him anymore. It was about proving to everyone, especially Orson Garraway, that this wasn't just a dollar-bought mistake. This was her home, her fight, and Red was going to be the one to help her win it. She didn't put Red in the trailer. He was too proud, too strong. She rode him into town, riding straight through the heart of Gallatin County toward the fairgrounds. The morning sun gleamed off the polished chrome of the vehicles lined up outside the auction area. People were already gathering, chatting, and laughing, as if they hadn't a care in the world. Sarah could hear the murmur of voices, but it was all background noise. She had one thing on her mind, and her focus was sharp. When they reached the gates, heads turned. Conversations halted. The crowd parted before them like the sea before Moses, drawn by the sight of Red. He moved like a dream, his steps sure and graceful, every muscle in his body working in perfect harmony. His head held high, his eyes locked ahead, and his presence was undeniable. He was the kind of horse that commanded attention, the kind that people only spoke of in awe. Sarah rode him straight to the center of the fairgrounds, where the auction stage had been set up. Orson Garraway stood at the front, his chest puffed out with pride as he prepared to accept his Rancher of the Year award. He was dressed in his finest clothes, his polished boots clicking against the ground as he grinned and waved at the crowd. The people clapped, the sound of their applause filling the air like music, but all of it stopped when Sarah and Red approached. The crowd grew silent, the air thick with anticipation. Orson's confident smile faltered as he saw her. His eyes locked onto Red, and for the first time, Sarah saw something shift in his demeanor. Something dark. He took a step forward, But Sarah didn't give him the satisfaction of waiting for him to speak. She guided Red to the front of the stage, halting him with a precision that would have impressed any seasoned rider. Sarah dismounted, her boots touching the ground with a soft thud. She walked to the front of the stage, the silence hanging heavy between her and the crowd. Orson's smile was gone now, replaced by a tense, unreadable expression. Sarah wasn't afraid. She was done being afraid. "Congratulations on the award, Mr. Garraway," she said, her voice steady and clear, echoing across the arena. The crowd looked on, confused but curious. "But I believe you know my horse." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the microchip scanner she had used the night before. The familiar beeping sound filled the air as she turned to Sheriff Brody, who had been standing off to the side. His frown deepened as he approached, the crowd parting for him as he stepped forward. "Would you do the honors, Sheriff?" Sarah asked. Sheriff Brody looked down at her, his brow furrowed in confusion, but he took the scanner from her hand and ran it over Red's neck. The beep sounded again, and the numbers appeared on the screen. A low murmur swept through the crowd as people started to piece together what was happening. Sarah held up the sheet of papers she had spent hours gathering. "This horse," she continued, her voice rising now, "is not some stray I found. His registered name is Crimson Horizon. He's a champion cutting horse, sired by a Hall of Famer. His bloodline is legendary. The last registered owner was Jedediah Croft." The words hit the crowd like a shockwave. Orson's face drained of color as he tried to regain his composure, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. Sarah wasn't done. "I found his microchip buried beneath years of neglect," she went on, holding up the financial records she had unearthed at the courthouse. "And these are the records that show how you, Mr. Garraway, systematically defrauded a dying man, took control of his estate, and tried to steal his land. You left this horse to die, expecting no one would find him. But I did." A gasp rose from the crowd as people began to realize the magnitude of what Sarah was saying. Orson Garraway stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was caught, trapped in the lies he had built over the years. "And when I wouldn't sell, when I wouldn't be intimidated," Sarah added, her voice a quiet fury, "you tried to burn me out. You set my barn on fire, hoping it would break me. Well, Mr. Garraway, it didn't. And now I'm exposing you for what you really are." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel the weight of the truth in the air, could see it reflected in the shocked faces of the crowd. No one was clapping now. No one was cheering for Garraway. The truth was out, and it was clear as day. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand firmly gripping the handcuffs that would soon seal Garraway's fate. "Orson Garraway," Sheriff Brody said, his voice booming across the arena, "you're under arrest." The crowd erupted into a chorus of murmurs, angry shouts filling the air as Garraway's facade crumbled. The applause that had been meant for him was now aimed at Sarah, the woman who had fought for a horse and a legacy. The woman who had brought down a powerful man with nothing but her determination. As Orson Garraway was led away in handcuffs, Sarah stood tall. She had won. And as she looked down at Red, she realized this was more than just a victory. This was redemption for both of them. The roar of the crowd was still ringing in Sarah's ears as she walked toward the sheriff's cruiser, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in what felt like years, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. The truth had come to light, and Garraway, once a giant in the community, was being taken away in handcuffs. The fight wasn't over, but this was a victory she would savor for just a moment. As Sheriff Brody and the deputies led Garraway toward the back of the cruiser, Sarah stayed behind, watching the crowd disperse. Some whispered, others shook their heads, but the respect in their eyes was undeniable. Sarah had done what no one else had been able to do. She had stood up to a bully who had thought he could get away with everything. Her eyes moved to Red, who stood by the arena gates, his head held high, as if he too knew something monumental had just happened. The stallion's copper coat gleamed under the sunlight, a symbol of resilience. a reminder of the quiet strength that had brought them both here. He had been broken, discarded, left to die, but now he stood proud, a champion in his own right. Sarah made her way to him, her boots crunching softly on the dirt. As she approached, Red gave her a soft nick, his warm breath tickling her cheek. She smiled, her hand moving instinctively to his shoulder. It was a touch of comfort, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through together. "I couldn't have done it without you, old boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The bond between them had been forged in the hardest of times, in the darkness of despair, and now they were standing in the light, victorious. But even as she stood there, her heart swelling with pride, Sarah knew this wasn't over. Garraway's arrest was just the beginning. The fight for Willow Creek Ranch was far from won, and the truth of what he had done still had to be fully exposed. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had a purpose now, a future, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, interviews, and media attention. Sarah's name was on everyone's lips. She was the hero who had taken down the corrupt rancher, the woman who had rescued the horse no one believed was worth saving. But amidst all the noise, the praise, and the attention, Sarah found herself thinking about Jedediah Croft, the man whose legacy had been nearly erased by Garraway's greed. She thought about the truth she had uncovered, and the way Garraway had tried to bury it. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about honoring Jedediah's memory, his wishes for the land, and his beloved horse, Crimson Horizon. The ranch had been more than just a piece of property to him. It had been a home, a place where he had hoped to make a difference, and now that hope had been passed on to Sarah. She decided it was time to go back to the courthouse. There was more to uncover, and she needed to know everything. Armed with the records she had already found, Sarah spent another long afternoon in the dusty archives, the smell of old paper filling the air. The search led her to Jedediah Croft's final will and testament, hidden among the legal documents, and with it, a revelation that left her breathless. Jedediah had never intended for Willow Creek Ranch to be sold or abandoned. His will was clear. He had wanted the ranch to be donated to a foundation dedicated to equine therapy for children with disabilities, to provide a safe space where horses like Red could heal and help others heal in return. And not only that, he had wanted Red, his prized horse, to be a part of it. Sarah sat in the courthouse holding the will in her hands, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose settle deep in her chest. This wasn't just about saving the ranch or stopping Garraway. This was about fulfilling Jedediah's legacy, about honoring the man who had wanted nothing more than to see the ranch become a place of healing. With the support of the Equine Therapy Foundation, Sarah set about making the ranch a reality. The foundation's board of directors was amazed when they saw the transformation, not just in the land but in Sarah herself. She wasn't just the woman who had stood up to Garraway. She was the heart and soul of Willow Creek now. The foundation offered her the position of director to run the newly established Willow Creek Healing Ranch, and they reimbursed her for every penny she had spent, every sacrifice she had made. Her $1 investment had been worth more than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a survivor of a broken dream, she was the architect of something new, something meaningful. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch began to thrive. The house was restored, its windows once again bright and welcoming. The fences were strong and sturdy, the pastures lush and green. But the most beautiful change was the sound. The quiet had been replaced by the laughter of children. Sarah stood by the arena fence one afternoon, watching a small boy with cerebral palsy gently stroke Red's copper neck. The great stallion stood as still as a statue, his head lowered patiently, allowing the boy to connect with him. The bond between the two was something Sarah could never have imagined. Red, the horse who had been discarded and left to die, was now the heart of the ranch, healing not only himself but others who needed him just as much as she had. As Sarah watched the boy smile, a tear slid down her cheek. She had found her purpose, her home, and her healing in the most unlikely of places. And as she looked at Red, she knew that together they had both been given a second chance. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the restored Willow Creek Ranch, its warm light illuminating the once broken land that had now become a place of healing and hope. Sarah stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the children in the therapy program interact with the horses, their laughter echoing across the fields. It was a sound she had longed to hear. Life, joy, and new beginnings. Red stood nearby, his copper coat gleaming in the sun, the majestic stallion now a symbol of resilience. Sarah ran her hand across the smooth, muscular shoulder of the horse who had saved her. In so many ways he had been her salvation, and now he was giving that same chance to others. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, both for the land and for the lives of those who came here seeking refuge. But as much as Sarah cherished the progress they had made, the shadow of Garraway still lingered over her. Orson Garraway had been arrested, but the damage he had done to the land, to Jedediah's legacy, and to Sarah's life could not be undone with a simple court ruling. Sarah knew that his influence had run deep in Gallatin County, and while his arrest was a victory, it was only the beginning of a long road ahead. Her days were filled with managing the growing therapy program, overseeing the restoration of the property, and ensuring that Red remained in top condition. He was more than just a horse now. He was the heart of the ranch, a living embodiment of everything Sarah had fought for. But the weight of responsibility was heavy, and there were times when she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had taken on. It was on one of those days, when the dust was settling from another long round of renovations, that a letter arrived. It was addressed to Sarah, in an envelope that was too pristine, too official. Her hands shook as she opened it, the words inside sending a cold shiver down her spine. The letter was from Garraway's lawyers. They were suing her. It wasn't a surprise. Sarah had known this was coming. Garraway's pride wouldn't let him accept defeat so easily. The letter claimed that Garraway still held ownership over Willow Creek Ranch, and that his previous sale to her was invalid. The lawyers argued that since the county's foreclosure process had been rushed, the sale of the land could be legally challenged, and they were prepared to fight her in court for control of the property. The weight of the threat hit Sarah hard, but she knew she couldn't let it break her. Not now, not after everything they had gone through. With the ranch growing and the children's therapy program flourishing, Sarah had the support she needed to fight back. The foundation had already put their full weight behind her, and the local community, once skeptical of her arrival, had rallied around her. She wasn't alone in this fight, not anymore. But Garraway wasn't just a corrupt rancher. He was a man with power, resources, and a deep network of influence. This battle was about more than just ownership. It was about what Garraway represented: greed, manipulation, and the crushing weight of power that crushed everything in its path. Sarah's resolve hardened. She had already faced down the darkest parts of this journey, and she wasn't going to back down now. She had promised herself that she would not let this land become another victim of the system Garraway had manipulated for years. This ranch was her home, her fight, and she would protect it at any cost. She spent the next few days preparing for the legal battle ahead, working with the Foundation's legal team to secure the ranch's rightful ownership. But as the weeks passed, she began to realize that Garraway wasn't just trying to take the ranch back, he was also trying to erase Jedediah Croft's legacy. He had already destroyed so much, but Sarah refused to let him win. It was in the quiet moments, after the day's work was done, when Sarah would sit in the barn with Red, her hand resting on his shoulder, that she found the strength to keep going. There was no escaping the harsh reality of the fight ahead, but every time she saw the children interact with the horses, every time she saw the joy on their faces, she knew she couldn't give up. The ranch was more than just a piece of land. It was a place of hope, healing, and new beginnings for so many. And it wasn't going anywhere. The therapy program had become an integral part of the community, bringing together people from all walks of life, all connected by their shared struggles. The ranch was no longer the isolated, forgotten place it once was. It was now a beacon of light in the valley, a symbol of what could be accomplished with determination, compassion, and a little bit of faith. But even with all of that, the looming legal battle hung over Sarah like a storm cloud. She had to be prepared for the fight of her life, not just for the ranch, but for the future she had worked so hard to build. The fight with Garraway was just beginning, and Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy. But she wasn't alone. She had Red. She had the community. And most importantly, she had the truth on her side. The sun had begun its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Montana mountains, casting long shadows over Willow Creek Ranch. It was an evening like so many others, quiet and peaceful, with the rustling of leaves and the soft, rhythmic thumping of Red's hooves as he grazed in the field. Yet, despite the calm, Sarah knew this would be the day that would decide it all, the culmination of months of struggle, perseverance, and heartache. The legal battle with Garraway had reached its final stage, and the courtroom doors would soon close on her fight to keep the ranch. Her nerves were taut as a bowstring, but there was something else, something deeper, welling inside her, a quiet confidence. She had faced the impossible before, and every time she had risen stronger. This time, she wasn't fighting for herself alone. She was fighting for the land, for Red, for Jedediah Croft's legacy, and for the children who had come to find healing. This was bigger than her. This was about proving that compassion, determination, and the will to fight could overcome even the darkest of intentions. The courtroom was packed when Sarah arrived. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of hearings and motions, with Garraway's lawyers doing everything they could to twist the truth. But Sarah wasn't backing down. She had the evidence, she had the truth, and as she entered the room she felt a calm resolve take over. Orson Garraway sat in the back of the courtroom, his face tight with frustration, his once imposing presence now a mere shadow of the man he had been. His usual air of arrogance was gone. He was on the defensive now, his empire crumbling piece by piece. As Sarah walked to her seat, she caught his eye, and for the first time, she saw fear in his gaze. It was the kind of fear that only came when you knew you were about to lose everything. Sarah's lawyer, a seasoned and sharp woman named Eleanor, stood beside her. Together, they had worked tirelessly, poring over every detail, every legal loophole, every record. They had filed motions, presented evidence, and countered Garraway's lies at every turn. And now, it was time for the final arguments. Garraway's lawyer took the floor first, spinning a tale of unforeseen errors in the auction process and attempting to cast doubt on the validity of the sale. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. When it was her turn, she stood tall, her voice unwavering as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her eyes scanning the room, "what we're talking about here today isn't just a piece of land. This isn't just about property rights. This is about the life of a man, Jedediah Croft, who spent years building something meaningful here, a place of healing, a legacy that was almost destroyed by greed. This ranch was never just an asset to be bought and sold. It was a home, a sanctuary for people and animals alike." She paused, letting her words sink in, the room silent as every eye was fixed on her. "And then there's Red," she continued, her voice soft but powerful. "A horse who was left to die, abandoned when his value was no longer useful to those who would exploit him. But he survived, he fought, and so did I. Together we've rebuilt this place, and we've brought hope back to this land. This is about more than just fighting for a ranch. It's about fighting for what's right." Her hand rested on the papers in front of her, papers filled with irrefutable evidence of Garraway's fraud, his manipulation, and his betrayal. She didn't need to say any more. The truth was laid bare, and there was no denying it. The room was still as the judge deliberated, the air thick with anticipation. Orson Garraway's lawyer had no more arguments to make. All that was left now was the decision. It felt like an eternity before the judge finally raised his gavel. "In light of the evidence presented, and the overwhelming facts that have come to light regarding Mr. Garraway's actions, I find in favor of Miss Sarah Lockxley and Willow Creek Ranch," the judge declared. A wave of relief and joy washed over Sarah, her knees nearly giving way beneath her as she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had won. The ranch was hers. Garraway's legal claims had been overruled, and the land, the legacy, and the future were now safe. But the victory wasn't just hers. It was shared by everyone who had supported her along the way, the foundation, the local community, and the children who had found solace in the horses. The ranch had become more than just a place. It had become a symbol of resilience, of second chances, and of the power of compassion. In the days that followed, the community rallied around Sarah. Garraway's defeat was swift and final. His assets were frozen, his reputation shattered, and he would face the full extent of the law for his crimes. But for Sarah, that didn't matter. What mattered was the future, one where Willow Creek Ranch would continue to thrive, offering hope and healing to those who needed it most. And as she stood in the barn, looking out over the land she had fought so hard to save, she knew this was only the beginning. The ranch was no longer just a refuge for her, it was a refuge for everyone. The therapy program grew, the children thrived, and Red, once a broken soul, was now a proud symbol of the strength of the spirit. With a deep breath, Sarah turned to the pasture, where Red was grazing peacefully. The horse had found his purpose, just as she had found hers. Together, they had overcome the odds. Together, they had fought for something that would last. This wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of a legacy.